Emily Clark lived in a small, peaceful town surrounded by green fields and gentle hills. The streets were quiet, the people friendly, and almost everyone knew each other. Life there was simple, but for Emily, it was filled with dreams far bigger than the town itself. Her family didn't have much money, but they had love, and they believed in working hard for what they had. Ever since Emily was a little girl, she had been drawn to the sound of the trumpet. She first heard it when a traveling band came to play at the town square one summer evening. The bold, golden sound filled the air like sunshine, and it made her heart jump with excitement. That night she couldn't sleep. The tune kept playing in her mind over and over again. She decided right then that she wanted to play the trumpet someday. Her father found an old, used trumpet at a small pawn shop in the next town. It was scratched, slightly dented, and missing a case, but when he handed it to Emily, it felt like magic in her hands. She cleaned it carefully with a soft cloth and tried to blow into it. At first, only a squeaky noise came out, and her parents laughed, but she didn't give up. Every afternoon after school, she sat on the front porch trying to make it sing. She didn't have a teacher or any fancy music books, so she learned in her own way. She listened to the church band on Sundays. She studied how their fingers moved and how they breathed between notes. At night, she tuned into the local radio and played along softly, sometimes missing the notes, sometimes getting them right. When she hit the correct ones, her smile lit up her face. She felt the music deep inside her, like it was speaking directly to her soul. Her neighbors would sometimes stop to listen when they passed by. They'd smile and nod, surprised at how much emotion came from that old trumpet. Children sat on the grass clapping after each song, and old folks waved from their porches. Emily didn't notice them much. She was lost in her own little world of rhythm and sound. At school, she wasn't popular or loud. She sat in the back of the classroom, doodling musical notes in her notebook. Most of her classmates didn't know how talented she was. To them, she was just quiet, polite Emily. But those who passed by her house in the evenings knew otherwise. They called her the girl with the golden tone because her trumpet always carried a warmth that touched people's hearts. Her parents were proud but worried. They wanted her to study something practical, maybe become a teacher or a nurse, something stable. But they couldn't say no when they saw her eyes shine whenever she played. Her mother often stood by the kitchen window, listening quietly while Emily practiced outside. The notes floated through the air like prayers. Sometimes, when the day ended and the sun turned the sky orange, Emily would play her favorite tune while the crickets started to sing. The sound mixed with the evening breeze and filled the whole neighborhood. For her, those were the happiest moments, just her, the trumpet and the open sky. Still, life wasn't always easy. The trumpet needed repairs, and her family didn't have extra money. There were times when she thought of giving up, but each time something kept her going. Maybe it was the memory of that first summer night when she fell in love with music. Or maybe it was the belief that one day, someone important would hear her play when she wasn't playing. She helped her parents at the small grocery shop they owned. She swept the floors, packed groceries, and greeted customers with a smile. Many customers had no idea that the quiet girl behind the counter could make a trumpet sound like it was telling a story. But every coin she saved went into a small jar labeled, "For music." She dreamed of one day buying a better trumpet or maybe taking real lessons. On weekends, she joined the church band when they were short of players. Her hands trembled the first time, but the moment she blew the first note, the fear melted away. The churchgoers turned their heads, surprised by the power in her sound. After the service, the band leader shook her hand and said, "You have something special, young lady." That was the first time anyone had ever said those words to her, and she carried them in her heart like a treasure. Sometimes late at night, Emily would sit by her window, looking at the stars and wondering what it would feel like to play on a real stage. She imagined the bright lights, the applause, the feeling of her music reaching people she had never met. In those moments, she promised herself she would keep playing. No matter what, she didn't know how or when, but deep down, she believed her trumpet would someday take her somewhere far beyond her little town, and so day after day, she practiced, not for fame or money, but for love. Pure, simple love for the sound that made her heart come alive. She didn't realize that her music would soon draw the attention of someone who could change her life forever. Someone whose world was completely different from hers, but whose heart still beat to the rhythm of the same passion. The news came to town like a spark lighting dry grass. spreading from one person to another until the whole place buzzed with excitement. A world-famous trumpet performer, Daniel Werner, was coming to their little town for a charity concert. It was the biggest thing that had happened there in years, and people couldn't stop talking about it. Posters appeared on every street corner, showing Daniel's confident smile, his shining golden trumpet, and a bold headline, "One night only." For most people, it was just an exciting event, a rare bit of glamour in their quiet lives. But for Emily Clark, it felt like destiny knocking at her door. Daniel Werner wasn't just any musician, he was her hero. She had watched his performances on television and online whenever she could find them. His music seemed to touch the sky smooth and effortless, like he was born with the trumpet in his hands. Every note he played felt alive, full of confidence and control. She had studied his videos closely, copying his hand positions and the way he took deep breaths before every high note. Sometimes she even closed her eyes and imagined standing beside him on stage, playing together, but that was only a dream. Something far too big for a small-town girl like her. When the mayor announced that Daniel's concert would be held in the town hall, Emily couldn't believe her ears. Tickets sold out in hours, and people from nearby towns began booking seats. The excitement filled the air. Children practiced their own little trumpets trying to sound like him. Shopkeepers decorated their stores with music notes, and everyone was preparing for the big night. Emily wanted to be there too, but the tickets were expensive. Her family couldn't afford them. She felt a deep ache in her chest when she saw the sold-out sign posted on the ticket booth. She walked home that day slowly, the sound of her trumpet case bumping gently against her leg. That evening, while helping her mother at the shop, she overheard two volunteers talking. They were looking for someone to help with the concert setup, arranging chairs, checking lights, and organizing the stage equipment. Without thinking twice, Emily offered to help. Her heart raced as they accepted her offer. She wouldn't be in the audience, but she'd be inside the hall, close enough to see Daniel Werner with her own eyes. The day of the concert arrived. The entire town seemed to glow with excitement. The sky was clear, and the air buzzed with music from the street performers who came to celebrate. Emily wore her best outfit, a simple blue dress and her lucky silver bracelet. Her old trumpet stayed at home, resting quietly in its corner, though she wished she could bring it along. Inside the hall, she helped carry boxes, set up microphones, and polish the stands. Every time someone mentioned Daniel's name, she felt a flutter in her stomach. Then around noon, the moment came. Daniel Werner himself walked in, tall, confident, wearing dark sunglasses and a gentle smile. People clapped just at the sight of him, and even the workers whispered to each other in awe. Emily froze for a moment, unable to breathe. The man whose music had shaped her dreams was standing just a few feet away. He greeted everyone kindly, shaking hands, thanking the staff for their help. His voice was calm but carried authority. When his eyes met Emily's for a second, she quickly looked down, blushing. She didn't want to look foolish. A little later, as she was adjusting the microphone stands on stage, she couldn't resist. She picked up a trumpet that had been left on a chair, one of the backup instruments, and gently blew a few notes. Soft and slow, she played a small jazz tune she had learned from the radio. The sound floated gently through the empty hall, echoing off the walls. Then she heard a voice behind her. "That's a beautiful tone." She turned around and almost dropped the trumpet. It was Daniel, watching her with an amused smile. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. She stuttered. "I just learned by myself, sir." Her hands shook a little, but she stood tall. Daniel chuckled softly and said, "Self-taught? That's impressive." Then he picked up his own trumpet. "How about a little duet?" Emily's eyes widened. "Me? With you?" she whispered. "Why not?" he said, lifting his trumpet with a playful grin. "Let's make the sound of the town." They began to play. First Daniel with his smooth, professional tone, then Emily following carefully. Her heart pounded in rhythm with every note. But as they continued, she began to relax. The two trumpets danced together, creating something warm and alive. The hall crew stopped what they were doing just to listen. It was as if time itself had slowed when they finished. Daniel lowered his trumpet and smiled. "You've got real talent," he said. "Would you like to join me tonight? Just for one song. A friendly duel of sorts." Emily's jaw dropped. She thought he was joking, but his expression was serious. "A duel?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said. Show me that beautiful tone in front of everyone. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. The famous Daniel Werner wanted to share the stage with her. The quiet girl from the small town, the one who practiced on her porch, now had a chance to prove herself. Her mind raced and she was terrified, but deep down, something in her heart whispered that this was her moment. When Daniel left the hall, everyone surrounded Emily in disbelief. The stage crew clapped her on the back. Some laughed, some cheered. "You're going to play tonight," one of them shouted. Emily smiled nervously, unable to speak. Her world had just turned upside down that night. As the town gathered for the concert, she stood backstage holding her old trumpet. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. The same trumpet that once echoed softly across her porch was now going to face the brightest lights she had ever seen. The sun had begun to sink behind the town's old rooftops, painting the sky in colors of orange and pink. Inside the town hall, the final touches were being made. Chairs were perfectly lined. The lights above the stage shimmered like tiny stars, and the smell of polished wood filled the air. Emily stood backstage, her heart pounding like a drum, clutching her old trumpet close to her chest. She still couldn't believe what had happened earlier that day. Daniel Werner, the world's most admired trumpet performer, had actually played music with her. Not only that, he had invited her to perform in front of everyone. The thought of it made her feel dizzy and excited all at once. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, his smile, his confident tone, and the warmth in his eyes when he said she had talent. As the doors opened and people began to take their seats, Emily peeked from behind the curtain. The hall was glowing with energy. Families dressed in their best clothes, children waving little flags, and camera flashes popping here and there. The mayor stood near the front row, proudly talking about how lucky the town was to host someone like Daniel Werner. The sound of laughter, footsteps, and chatter blended into one big hum of excitement. But in the middle of all that noise, Emily felt completely alone. Her palms were sweaty, her heart raced, and her stomach twisted like a knot. What if she played the wrong note? What if people laughed at her? She wasn't used to crowds, or her audience was usually just the evening breeze and her parents. Just then, Daniel entered from the side door. Looking calm and confident, his trumpet gleamed under the stage lights. He noticed Emily standing nervously near the curtain and gave her a reassuring nod. "You ready, young lady?" he asked. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," Daniel chuckled. "That's the spirit, remember? It's just music, and let it speak for you." Before the concert began, Daniel decided to do one quick rehearsal. He called for Emily to join him on stage for sound check. The hall was almost empty except for a few technicians and the band members tuning their instruments. The stage lights were softer now, casting a golden glow on the wooden floor. Emily stepped onto the stage slowly, feeling its smooth surface beneath her shoes. Her trumpet felt heavy, not from its weight, but from the meaning it carried. Daniel raised his trumpet, played a short melody, and nodded for her to follow. The first few notes from her trumpet were shaky, but Daniel smiled and said softly, "Relax. Trust your sound," so she did. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play again. This time the notes flowed easily. Warm and clear, the melody filled the hall, wrapping around the empty seats like a gentle wave. The technicians stopped working for a moment. Listening quietly, Daniel joined in, and soon the two of them were playing together, their music weaving into something truly special. When the last note faded, Daniel clapped softly and said, "Perfect." Emily blushed and looked at the floor. "I still made mistakes," she murmured. Daniel shook his head. "Mistakes don't matter when the music is honest. You play with your heart, and that's something even fame can't teach." His words stayed in her mind, glowing like a small flame. After the rehearsal, Daniel went backstage to rest before the concert. Emily stayed behind for a few minutes, sitting alone on the edge of the stage, staring at the empty seats. She could almost hear the applause that would come later, and it made her shiver. She whispered quietly, "Please, don't let me fail," and clutched her trumpet tighter. As the evening grew darker, the hall filled completely. The audience clapped and cheered as Daniel stepped onto the stage. He looked like a star under the lights, confident, elegant, every movement smooth and controlled. His trumpet sparkled as he began to play his opening piece. The sound was flawless, filling every corner of the hall with energy. People swayed with the rhythm. Completely lost in his performance backstage, Emily listened, her heart racing faster with every passing second. She admired him more than ever. but fear began to creep into her chest. How could she, a simple girl, ever stand next to someone so perfect? But then she remembered what he said. Let the music speak for you. Suddenly, one of the stage crew members rushed to her. You're up next, he whispered excitedly. Emily froze for a moment, her knees weak. But then she nodded and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled as she lifted her trumpet, but her eyes were steady now. She walked toward the stage entrance, hearing Daniel's final note echo through the hall like thunder. Daniel turned toward her with a proud smile. And now, he said to the audience, I'd like to invite a very special guest. A young lady with a gift that reminds us why music is truly magical. The audience murmured in surprise, wondering who he was talking about. Then Emily stepped out, blinking under the bright lights. For a moment there was silence. Daniel leaned toward her and whispered, Just play your heart. She nodded, raised her trumpet, and began. The first sound she made was soft, almost like a whisper. But it grew stronger, warmer, deeper. People leaned forward in their seats, surprised by the power coming from this shy girl. Daniel smiled as she continued, matching her rhythm with his own. The hall filled with a harmony that seemed to lift the air itself. By the time the last note faded, the crowd was completely still. Then suddenly they erupted into applause, clapping, cheering, whistling. Emily lowered her trumpet, her eyes wide in disbelief. Daniel turned toward her and said quietly, You see, I told you, music speaks louder than fear. At that moment, Emily realized this was not just a performance. It was a beginning, a moment that would change everything. She had stepped out of her small world and found her place under the lights, and somewhere deep inside, she knew her journey had only just begun. The next morning, the whole town was talking about what had happened the night before. People gathered at cafes, shops, and street corners, replaying the moment when the world-famous Daniel Werner had shared the stage with a small-town girl. Some called it a miracle. Others called it pure courage for Emily Clark. It still felt like a dream she hadn't fully woken from. Her name was on everyone's lips, the girl with the old trumpet, they said. The one who made Daniel Werner smile. The local newspaper even printed her picture on the front page, a blurry shot taken from someone's phone showing her standing next to Daniel. Trumpet in hand, her parents bought 5 copies, unable to stop smiling, but while the town celebrated, Emily's heart was caught between excitement and fear. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. You play with your heart. She couldn't forget how proud he had looked at her, but she also remembered how nervous she had been, her hands shaking, her lips trembling before that first note. She wondered if she truly deserved all this attention. That afternoon, as she sat on her porch polishing her trumpet, a car stopped in front of her house. The sunlight reflected off its shiny black paint, and her heart skipped a beat when Daniel Werner stepped out. Still wearing his confident smile and his trademark dark glasses, she almost dropped her trumpet in surprise. Morning, Emily, he said warmly. Mind if I join you for a moment? She nodded quickly, her voice lost somewhere between shock and disbelief. Daniel sat down on the porch steps beside her. I've been thinking about last night, he said. You have something rare, and I don't say that often. Emily blushed, not knowing what to say. Then Daniel leaned forward slightly, his tone turning more serious. I have a little idea, he said. I'll be performing again tomorrow, this time at the regional festival in the city. Thousands of people, professional musicians, press, the works. Emily listened carefully, her hands gripping her trumpet. How would you feel, he continued, about joining me again, but this time, not as a guest, as a challenger? A challenger, she repeated softly. Daniel smiled. Yes, a trumpet duel, you and me, head to head, same song, different souls. Let's see how far your heart can take you. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak, her mind spun in circles. A duel with Daniel Werner, the man whose records she had listened to for years, the musician who had traveled the world. She was just a simple girl with an old trumpet and no training. I can't, she whispered finally. I'm not ready. Daniel shook his head gently. No one is ever ready for something great. Emily, he said, you either take the leap, or you spend your life wondering what could have been. His words hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in kindness. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with the image of Daniel on stage. His confident stance, the sparkle of his trumpet, the roar of the crowd. She felt small compared to that. But deep inside her chest, something stirred, a quiet voice that said, You can do this, she sat up, lit the small lamp beside her bed, and took out her trumpet. The town was silent, everyone asleep, but she didn't care. She went out to the porch and began to play softly. The night air was cool, and the sound of her trumpet floated into the stars. Each note carried her fear, her hope, and her determination. By morning, she had made her decision. When Daniel's car arrived again, she met his eyes with newfound confidence. "I'll do it," she said firmly. Daniel grinned. "That's the spirit," he replied. "Tomorrow, you and I will give them something they'll never forget." Word spread quickly through the town like wildfire. "Emily's going to battle Daniel Werner in a trumpet duel," people exclaimed. Children ran through the streets shouting the news. Reporters from nearby cities began arriving, wanting to meet the girl who dared to face a legend. Her parents were worried. "Emily, are you sure about this?" Her mother asked. "He's a professional." "Honey," her father added. But Emily just smiled. "I know," she said softly. "But he taught me something. That music isn't about who's better. It's about who's honest." Her parents exchanged glances, then hugged her tightly, proud but nervous. The next day, the town gathered to see them off as Daniel and Emily headed to the city in his car. On the way, Daniel played soft jazz on the radio, the kind of music that made the road feel endless. "Nervous?" he asked. Emily laughed quietly. "A little," she admitted. "Good," he said. "That means you care." When they reached the city, Emily couldn't believe her eyes. The festival hall was massive, with banners, cameras, and a crowd larger than she had ever seen. Backstage, she watched as Daniel greeted journalists and musicians with ease. He looked like he belonged there, every movement confident and natural. She, on the other hand, felt like an outsider. But Daniel noticed her quietness. He walked over and said softly, "Emily, don't think of this as a fight. Think of it as a conversation. Let your trumpet tell your story." She nodded, breathing deeply, holding on to every word. When the announcer called their names, the crowd erupted in applause. The stage lights flared bright, and the world seemed to slow down. Daniel stepped forward first, smiling at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight isn't about winning or losing. It's about sharing the truth through sound." Then he turned to Emily and whispered, "Ready, challenger?" She smiled nervously but nodded. Her hands trembled, but her heart felt steady. As they lifted their trumpets and the first notes rang through the hall, Emily realized something powerful. This wasn't just a duel. It was her destiny calling, and she was finally brave enough to answer. The festival hall shimmered under bright lights, a sea of faces stretching as far as Emily could see. Cameras flashed, people whispered excitedly, and the sound of tuning instruments filled the air like a soft storm before the music. Emily stood behind the curtain, her hands clutching her old trumpet so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her heart thudded in her chest, faster and faster. She could hear Daniel Werner's voice echoing through the speakers as he greeted the crowd with his usual charm. "Good evening, everyone," he said smoothly. "Tonight, we have something very special. A friendly duel between two trumpets. Two hearts, two worlds," the audience cheered, their applause rolling through the hall like thunder. Emily peeked through the side curtain. Her breath caught as she saw him on stage, tall, confident, glowing under the lights. His trumpet glistened like gold, his posture calm, his smile easy. He looked every bit the master he was, the man she had admired for years. For a second, she felt small again, like that little girl sitting on her porch, dreaming of music under the stars. But then she looked down at her old trumpet, scratched and worn but still shining in her hands. It had carried her through lonely nights and endless practice. It had listened to her laughter and her tears. It was part of her. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "You and me, old friend." Just like always, the stage manager gave her a nod. It was almost time. Daniel began to play first, and the hall fell silent. His first note sliced through the air, clean, bright and powerful. Every movement of his fingers was precise, every note smooth as silk. He played with the confidence of someone who had mastered his craft completely. The melody danced through the hall, fast and flawless. The crowd erupted in applause even before he finished his first piece. Emily closed her eyes, listening carefully. She could feel the strength in his playing, but she also noticed something else. It was perfect. Yes, but it felt distant, polished like glass. It sparkled. But it didn't touch her heart the way her own playing did. She remembered his words from the day before. Don't think of it as a fight. Think of it as a conversation. When the announcer called her name, her knees nearly gave out. She stepped onto the stage slowly, the lights blinding her. The crowd murmured on a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "That's her," someone whispered. "The small-town girl?" She tried to ignore the noise and focused on Daniel, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. She lifted her trumpet, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. The hall was so quiet she could hear her heartbeat. Then her first note rang out, soft, trembling, but full of emotion. It wasn't as perfect as Daniel's, but it was alive. Her sound carried warmth, honesty, and something raw that reached into people's chests. As she played, she forgot about the cameras, the judges, the crowd. She thought of her porch back home, of her mother smiling from the kitchen window, of the crickets singing in the grass. Each note she played was a memory, a story, a piece of her heart. Slowly, the audience began to lean forward, drawn into the emotion behind every sound. Daniel watched her closely from the side of the stage. His confident smile faded into quiet admiration. He could see it. She wasn't playing to impress. She was playing to feel, and that was something rare. The crowd didn't just hear her music. They felt it when she finished her first piece. The hall stayed silent for a second, as if no one wanted to break the magic. Then applause exploded. Louder than before, people stood up, clapping and cheering. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. Emily lowered her trumpet, breathing hard, her hands shaking. She couldn't believe it. She had done it. But the duel wasn't over yet. Daniel stepped back on stage, his expression thoughtful. He raised his trumpet again, this time with a different energy. He began to play not as a performer, but as a man answering a challenge from the heart. The two of them traded melodies back and forth, question and answer, light and shadow, master and student. The hall turned into a battlefield of sound. Daniel's notes soared with power and precision, while Emily sang with tenderness and soul. The crowd swayed, caught between the two, feeling the tension rise like a wave. Sometimes their sounds collided, sometimes they blended into perfect harmony. It was more than music. It was a story unfolding right before their eyes. In the middle of the duel, Emily felt something shift inside her. Her fear melted away completely, replaced by something pure and strong. She wasn't just following anymore, she was leading. Her trumpet spoke with confidence she didn't know she had. Her tone grew stronger, clearer. Her eyes met Daniel's, and for the first time, she didn't see a star, she saw an equal. By the time the final note hung in the air, both of them stood still, breathing hard. The hall erupted into wild applause, cheers, and whistles. People stood, clapping above their heads, shouting her name, "Emily! Emily!" She looked out at the sea of faces, tears filling her eyes. Daniel walked over to her. His trumpet lowered and smiled gently. "You've got it," he said quietly. "That fire, don't ever lose it." He lifted her hand high. Turning to the crowd, "Ladies and gentlemen," he said proudly, "this young woman reminded me tonight why music matters." The applause grew even louder, echoing through the hall like a heartbeat. Emily stood frozen, overwhelmed. The lights, the cheers, the warmth, it felt like a dream, but it was real. The simple girl from a small town had stood beside her hero, faced her fears, and found her voice that night. As the festival ended and the lights dimmed, Daniel turned to her and said, "This isn't the end, Emily. It's the beginning." And as they walked off stage together, Emily smiled through her tears, knowing deep inside that her life had truly changed forever. The night after the duel, Emily couldn't sleep. Her ears still rang with the echoes of applause, the sound of cheering that had filled the hall like a wave. She lay in her hotel bed staring at the ceiling, the trumpet resting beside her on the pillow. Her heart still raced with excitement, but deep down, she felt something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just happiness. It was something deeper, something that made her chest ache and her eyes sting with tears. For the first time in her life, she had felt truly seen. She had faced her greatest fear, played with her hero, and heard her music touch people's hearts. But as the night grew quiet, another feeling crept in: doubt. The duel was over, but in her mind, she kept replaying every note, every breath, every tiny mistake she thought she had made. Was I really good enough? She wondered. Did people clap because they meant it, or just because they felt sorry for me? The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, and she woke up to a knock on her door. It was Daniel Werner, still wearing his calm smile and carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, champion," he said warmly. Handing her one, Emily blushed. "Champion? I didn't win." she said softly. Daniel chuckled. Didn't you? He asked. You made the audience cry, Emily. That's worth more than any trophy. They sat on the balcony overlooking the city, sipping coffee while the morning breeze carried the distant sounds of street music. Daniel watched the skyline quietly before turning to her. You know, he said, when I was your age, I used to play for coins on street corners. I thought fame would fill the silence in my heart. But it didn't. He looked down at his trumpet resting on his lap. Somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. Emily listened carefully. Her eyes wide, Daniel continued. Last night when you played, I remembered, he smiled faintly. You reminded me of the fire I used to have. Before the world turned music into business, Emily looked at him. Speechless, no one had ever said something so personal to her before. Later that day, they went together to the town square, where the festival had set up an open stage for street performances. People were milling around, buying food, laughing, enjoying the sunshine. Daniel and Emily stood off to the side, unnoticed. Want to play again? He asked. Emily's eyes widened. Here, now? She asked. He nodded. No cameras, no lights. Just music. They took their trumpets and stood near a fountain where children were tossing coins. Emily started first, playing a soft melody that drifted through the warm air like a whisper. Daniel joined in, his tone smooth and steady, blending perfectly with hers. People began to turn, smiling, clapping along. A small crowd gathered, drawn by the beauty of the sound as they played. Emily felt something magical happen inside her. It was different from the stage, different from the spotlight. Here it was just pure joy. The music flowed naturally, each note connecting to the next like a heartbeat. She could feel the same excitement she used to feel on her porch back home. That same freedom and love that made her fall in love with the trumpet. When they finished, the small crowd erupted in applause. Some people tossed coins into the fountain. Others simply smiled and thanked them. Daniel looked at her with pride. That, he said softly, was real. Emily smiled back. It felt real, she replied. But that afternoon brought something unexpected. A reporter approached Daniel, microphone in hand, asking, Mr. Werner, after last night's duel, would you say you've found your successor? Daniel paused, then turned to Emily. I wouldn't call her my successor, he said. I'd call her my reminder. The reporter looked confused. Reminder? Daniel nodded. Yes, a reminder that music is alive. It belongs to everyone, not just to those on the big stage. Emily felt tears rise in her eyes. The way he spoke about her wasn't as a mentor to a student, but as one musician to another, an equal. That evening, as the festival came to an end, Daniel invited Emily to join him on the main stage one last time. The organizers hadn't planned it, but when Daniel Werner requested something, no one said no. The lights dimmed, and Daniel stepped forward to speak to the crowd. Last night, I met someone who reminded me that perfection isn't the goal of music. Honesty is, he said. So tonight we'll play one last song, not as master and student, but as two souls speaking the same language. The hall fell silent. And then the first note echoed through the air. Emily began softly, her trumpet voice trembling but clear. Daniel followed, their sounds weaving together like two threads of the same story. The crowd held their breath. Every note carried emotion, pain, hope, joy, and gratitude. Halfway through the song, Emily closed her eyes. She wasn't just playing anymore, she was living the music. She saw flashes of her journey, her porch, her parents' smiles, the nervous moments before the duel, the laughter she shared with Daniel that morning. It all came pouring out through the trumpet. When the final note faded, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds. Then the entire audience stood. Clapping and cheering, people shouted her name. Daniel bowed slightly and pointed toward her, giving her the moment completely. Emily's hands shook as she lowered her trumpet. Her eyes glistened with tears as the applause roared. Daniel leaned close and whispered, That was your moment of truth, Emily. Never forget how it felt, and in that instant, she knew exactly what he meant. It wasn't about fame or winning. It was about finding herself, the girl who started with an old trumpet, who believed that even simple music could touch the world. That night, as they walked off stage together, Emily looked at Daniel and smiled. Thank you, she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. Thank you for reminding me what real music sounds like. They stepped into the night air, their trumpets glinting under the city lights, the crowd's cheers still echoing behind them. And as the stars shimmered above, Emily finally understood. The duel had never been about competition. It had been about connection, the kind that only true music could create. The next morning, the world felt different for Emily Clark. The sun shone brighter, the city streets seemed livelier, and the air itself felt lighter. She walked through the festival grounds with her trumpet case in hand, smiling shyly at people who now recognized her. They stopped her for pictures, asked for autographs, and told her how her music made them cry. It was overwhelming, almost unreal. Only a day ago, she had been a quiet girl from a small town. Now people whispered her name with admiration. That's the girl who played against Daniel Werner. She was amazing. Her sound felt real. Their words made her cheeks warm. But inside she still felt like the same Emily, nervous, humble and endlessly grateful. Daniel, however, seemed unusually quiet that morning. They sat together at a cafe overlooking the city square, steam rising from their cups of tea. He stared at the crowd below, deep in thought. Emily noticed it and asked softly, "Are you all right?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Better than all right," he said. "Just thinking," after a long pause. He leaned back and said, "You know, Emily, last night wasn't just another concert for me. It changed something." She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked at her with a gentle seriousness. "For years I've been chasing perfection. Every note, every sound. Every performance had to be flawless, but you reminded me that music doesn't live in perfection. It lives in honesty." Emily felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say. Daniel continued, "When you played, I saw myself from years ago. Before fame, before critics, before pressure. You reminded me of why I started playing in the first place." His voice softened. "You reminded me of love." For a moment, silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of city traffic and distant laughter. Emily looked down at her trumpet case, tracing its old scratches with her fingers. "I never thought I'd inspire anyone like you," she whispered. Daniel chuckled. "That's the beauty of it. You didn't try to. You just played your truth." Later that afternoon, the festival organizers held a press conference to officially close the event. Dozens of reporters gathered, their cameras flashing and microphones pointed toward the stage. Emily stood beside Daniel, nervous as ever. The host announced, "Before we end this year's festival, we have a special moment. Mr. Daniel Werner has something he wishes to say." Daniel stepped forward, the room falling silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "for many years, I believed that skill was the soul of music, but last night, a young woman reminded me that the soul of music is something much simpler. Truth." He turned to Emily, his eyes shining with emotion. And that truth came from her. The crowd gasped softly, flashes of cameras flickering like lightning. Daniel continued, "I came here to perform for a crowd, but I'm leaving with something greater, a lesson. This young woman, Emily Clark, showed me what I had forgotten. That's why I'm giving her my spotlight tonight." Emily blinked, confused. "What?" she whispered under her breath. Daniel smiled and turned to the audience. "From today, I'm taking a break from the stage." A murmur spread across the room. "It's time for me to listen again, and it's time for her to play." He gestured for Emily to step forward. The host looked stunned but quickly signaled the camera crew to focus on her. Emily stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Daniel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "The world needs to hear you," he said softly. "Don't be afraid of it." Reporters shouted questions. Flashes blinded her eyes, but she smiled shyly. Holding her trumpet close, she didn't give a long speech or say anything grand. Instead, she raised her trumpet and played a single, gentle melody right there on stage. The sound silenced everyone. Notes floated through the air like a calm breeze after a storm, pure and full of heart. When she finished, the entire room erupted in applause. Even the journalists clapped instead of shouting questions. Daniel laughed quietly, clapping the loudest. "That's my girl," he said under his breath. In the days that followed, news spread like wildfire. Every music magazine, blog, and TV show talked about the girl who made Daniel Werner retire. Or reborn, as one headline put it. Emily's face appeared everywhere. People called her the voice of sincerity, the soul of the trumpet, and even the miracle from the small town. But fame didn't change her. She returned home a few weeks later, walking through the same streets she always had. People welcomed her with banners, music, and cheers. But Emily's favorite moment was sitting back on her porch. The same wooden steps where everything began. She lifted her trumpet, closed her eyes, and played for the sunset just like she used to. One evening, she received a letter from Daniel. It was handwritten, elegant, simple. It said, "Emily, the world will try to shape you, teach you, and even control your sound. Don't let it play the way your heart speaks, and you'll never lose your truth. With love and respect, Daniel Werner." She held the letter against her chest, tears filling her eyes. In that moment, she realized something. The real victory wasn't the duel, or the applause, or even the fame. It was this connection, this friendship born out of music and honesty. That night, she stood on her porch again, the stars shining above her just like before. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you," before raising her trumpet. The first note floated into the quiet air, gentle and golden, reaching beyond the hills, and somewhere far away, perhaps in another city, Daniel Werner might have heard it, smiling quietly to himself, because even though their paths had parted, their music still spoke the same language, one that came straight from the heart. Years passed, but the sound of that trumpet duel never truly faded. The night Emily Clark stood beside Daniel Werner became a story people loved to tell. It was replayed in documentaries, quoted in interviews, and remembered by everyone who had witnessed it. Yet for Emily, the true memory wasn't about fame or glory. It was about that feeling, the fire that had been born deep inside her heart. After Daniel stepped away from the stage, he kept his promise to listen. Sometimes he wrote her letters from faraway places, quiet towns, seaside villages, even mountain retreats. His words were always the same. Gentle, wise, filled with pride. "Keep playing, Emily," he would write. "Remind the world what music really means." She kept every letter in a wooden box, tied with a ribbon, like treasures of the soul. Emily's life changed, but in the most beautiful way. Music schools started inviting her to perform. She traveled to cities she had only seen in pictures. London, Paris, New York. Her name appeared on posters and programs. Emily Clark, the heart of the trumpet. Crowds filled every hall she played in. And every time she lifted her instrument, she remembered her promise. To play with honesty. Not perfection, but even as her fame grew, Emily never let the world make her forget where she came from. When people asked her about her success, she would smile and say, "It all began on a wooden porch with an old trumpet and a sky full of dreams." And when young musicians came to her for advice, she always told them, "Don't chase applause, chase truth." A few years later, she returned to her hometown for a charity concert, the same kind that had once brought Daniel Werner to her doorstep. The town looked almost the same. Quiet streets, friendly faces, children playing with makeshift instruments. She walked through it with a sense of wonder, realizing how far she had come. When she stepped onto the old stage of the town hall, memories flooded back. She could almost see her younger self in the front row, holding that scratched trumpet with trembling hands. Her parents sat proudly in the front again. Eyes filled with tears, the mayor gave a small speech, calling her our hometown miracle. But Emily didn't feel like a miracle. She felt like a messenger, carrying forward the gift Daniel had once shared with her. That evening, before the show began, she took a quiet walk backstage, and there, hanging on the wall, was an old photograph, the one taken years ago during that famous duel. She smiled at the sight of Daniel's confident grin and her own nervous face beside him. She reached out and touched the frame gently, whispering, "I hope you're listening tonight." As the lights dimmed and the crowd hushed, Emily took her place on stage. Her trumpet gleamed under the spotlight, but her heart was calm. She looked out into the sea of faces, children, families, old friend, and took a deep breath. "This song," she said softly, "is for the man who taught me that music lives in the heart." Then she began to play. The first note was soft as a sigh, drifting into the warm summer air. Her melody carried through the hall, slow and gentle at first, then rising with emotion. It wasn't just music. It was memory, gratitude, and love all woven together. People closed their eyes, some swaying, some smiling, a few quietly crying halfway through the song. Something magical happened. A beam of moonlight shone through one of the windows. Landing perfectly on her trumpet, it glowed faintly, as if touched by something beyond this world. And in that moment, Emily could almost feel Daniel there. His presence, his calm smile, his approving nod. It felt like a whisper in her ear. "That's it, Emily. Play your truth. When when the final note faded, there was silence, not because people didn't want to clap, but because they didn't want the music to end. Then the applause came, long, thunderous, and full of love. Emily lowered her trumpet, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her parents stood, clapping with pride. The children in the audience looked at her with shining eyes, their hearts catching the spark she had once received after the show, as the crowd slowly left. One little girl shyly approached her, clutching a small old trumpet. "Miss Emily," the girl said softly, "I want to play like you someday." Emily knelt down, smiling warmly. "Then play like you," she said gently. "Don't sound like me, sound like your own heart." The girl nodded, her eyes bright with wonder, and Emily knew the cycle had begun again later that night. When the town was quiet and the moon hung low over the hills, Emily sat on her porch, just like before, the same wooden steps, the same warm breeze. Only now the world seemed both smaller and larger at once. She lifted her trumpet and began to play softly. The notes floated into the night, mingling with the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. As she played, she thought about everything, her small beginnings, her nervous hands, the duel, the applause, Daniel's lessons, and the little girl who wanted to learn. She realized that this was her true legacy, not fame or records or trophies, but the hearts she touched. The stars shimmered above, and she whispered quietly into the night, "Thank you, Daniel." Her trumpet answered with a soft echo. The wind carried her melody far beyond the town, across fields and rivers, up into the open sky. And somewhere, maybe in another town or another lifetime, someone would hear that music and feel the same spark. The one that said, "It doesn't matter where you come from, or what you have. What matters is that you play your truth, and let your heart be heard." The night grew still again, and Emily smiled, resting her trumpet on her lap. Her legacy wasn't written in awards or fame. It was written in sound and honesty, in every note that spoke to another soul. And as long as her music lived on, so did the lesson Daniel had given her, that true greatness begins not with perfection but with passion,